Hello and welcome back to Bookmark Chronicles. Today I'm doing a review of The Taking of Jake Livingston by Ryan Douglas. I read this for Black and Readathon and I really enjoyed it, but I wanted to have a conversation about some of the content in this book because I think people go into it with certain expectations based off of word of mouth and that they aren't really getting the full story going in. So then when they start reading it, it can be a little jarring if you don't necessarily know what you're getting into. In this, we are following Jake. He is a teenager at a prep school and he is also a medium. There was a school shooting at a local public school in Jake's town, and for whatever reason, the ghost of that school shooter is trying to get Jake's attention. For Jake as a medium, he can see a ghost death loop, which means that he essentially sees the ghost in the minutes right before their death actually happens, and it kind of plays on a loop for him. With this school shooter, it is totally different. This ghost is very vengeful, and for whatever reason, his plans are including Jake. This ghost starts stalking him, and Jake tries to figure out what's really going on and why this ghost is coming after him the way that it is. So now I'm going to list off some of the content warnings that are in this book. I personally do not think that content warnings are spoilers, but if you don't want to know any of them going in, you can skip to this time point. But there are a lot of content warnings in this book, so I do want to make sure that I name all of them. Okay, so I tried to make a list as I was reading of content warnings. It is possible that I may have missed some, but these are the ones that I wrote down as I was reading. School shooting, suicide ideation and a suicide attempt, murder, possession, bullying, harassment, sexual assault, domestic violence, and homophobia. I also want to mention the perspectives of this book. It is dual perspective. So while we get Jake's perspective, we also get the perspective of Sawyer, the school shooter. That is going to be very rough for some people. I started reading it and I was like, oh, this is not what I expected. And I know people who have put it down after reading one of those chapters. So if that's something that you don't want to read, I do not recommend it. I will also say that there are subplots of romance and family and friendship, and all of those I really appreciated. It did sort of help me get through it when we had those moments, but again, this is a rough book to read. So if you have not yet read The Taking of Jake Livingston but would like to, this is your official spoiler warning. As per usual, I'm going to start off with the characters, starting with Jake. I like him as a character. He's just a teenager trying to get through. He's at this really prestigious prep school and there are very few students of color there. And on top of all of the regular stressors of being a high school student, he is also a medium, so he sees ghosts everywhere he goes. We also have Jake's brother, Benji. I didn't really like Benji until the end. He's kind of a dick. Thinks he's cooler older brother, ignores his little brother type, and I don't know, that just not a fan. My siblings and I would never do that, so not my favorite. Jake also has a few friends. I'm not really gonna include Grady as a friend. He is a former friend, I guess. I don't really like him. I never liked him from the very beginning. I have nothing else to say about him. I just don't like him. Jake's other friends are Fiona, who is another student of color at the school. I believe she's Asian, and they end up being really close. I really like the friendship that they form. It's really nice. And then there is also Alistair, who is a new Black transfer student that Jake has a crush on. The relationship between them is super cute. I really enjoyed it, which is surprising because a lot of times I don't like books that are a genre outside of romance and they have a romance subplot, but it wasn't into lovey. It was just them getting to know each other, becoming friends, sharing experiences. I really enjoyed it. And then we have Sawyer, the school shooter. Like I said, his chapters are rough. He is mentally ill. He has tried to attempt suicide, and it is talked about during his chapters pretty frequently. He is also bullied, and that is also on page. So again, if those are things that you don't want to read about, do not pick this up. I think about halfway through, I had to get the audio. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying the book. Like I said, it is a good read, but however, the content matter is very heavy. And also I was just like kind of dreading picking it up. I am glad that I read it though, but again, just be aware of that going in. So those are all of the main characters. And then in the beginning of the book, Jake finds out that a neighbor of his who was a student at the public school where the shooting happened, he survived that shooting. He's been murdered. And Jake's like, this is odd. Then Jake comes home one day and there's like blood on the walls of his living room and there are initials spelled and things like that. And he realizes that the initials of the blood on the wall are of Sawyer Doon, who is the school shooter from that other school. Jake never knew him in life, and so he doesn't really understand why Sawyer is coming after him, why he's stalking him, following him, and I think a part of what made this frustrating to read was that essentially you have Jake, who is dealing with all of this shit, being one of the few black students at his school. And so he's dealing with all of that. He's also a medium. It's hard for him to explain that to his family. To them, like, paranormal things don't really exist. And then all of a sudden, this young black boy is being harassed by the ghost of this white kid for essentially no reason. And that was really frustrating because at the end of the day, aside from Jake being a medium, what reason did Sawyer really have to be coming for him? There's also a side character named Chad, who obviously is the white kid at Jake's school that will not leave him alone. And there are like weird moments where like Fiona was like, yeah, Chad stares at you a lot, I've noticed, and shit like that. Like, Chad was obsessed with him. It was really fucking weird and really creepy. And eventually Jake reaches his boiling point and fucking snaps. And then of course, because the school has a no tolerance policy, Jake gets in trouble for defending himself. So there was just a lot going on, a lot of things that pissed me off. This by no means is going to be a happy read, but it does have a happy ending at least. Another thing to note is that both Jake and Sawyer are gay. So Jake's father left when he and Benji were younger, but because his dad found out he was gay, he physically abused Jake, and Benji had stepped in to stop their dad from beating him to death. But then we also find out that Jake's mom was also being abused by their father. And then Sawyer, his dad and uncle, I think, kind of taunted him for playing with dolls and took his doll and set it on fire and told him he couldn't hang out at his grandma's anymore. And so there's just a lot of homophobia in it as well. That was really hard. Sawyer was also sexually assaulted by a family member. So again, like I said, a lot of heavy elements. That is a part of what led to Sawyer's suicide attempt, and his first attempt was unsuccessful, but then his mother like didn't really want him to go to therapy because she didn't like the way it looked on their family. Just so many terrible stereotypes, and it was just a really awful situation. So there is some side drama with Jake's brother Benji, him and his on-again, off-again girlfriend, as well as Benji sleeping with Chad's girlfriend, and then Chad taking that out on Jake, and a bunch of mess that I guess is like typical high school stuff, but was just like really annoying, which is part of the reason that I didn't really like Benji for a really long time. So I'm not gonna run through all of the plot points because there's a lot happening, but essentially what happens is that Jake allows Sawyer to possess him, and Sawyer uses him to get revenge on the uncle that assaulted him. And there was a previous point in time where after it first happened, Sawyer pulled a gun on his uncle, but then his mom, not knowing what happened, walks into the situation, and when Sawyer shoots his uncle in the knee, his mother shoots him in the shoulder, which is a whole nother level of trauma that Sawyer has. So when Sawyer possesses Jake's body, he goes and he kills his uncle. I think he shoots him, and then he sets the house on fire with his uncle in it. And then he and Jake sort of are wrestling for control of his body, and eventually Jake is able to banish him. After that, like, everything sort of returns to normal. Jake ends up in the hospital, but he was able to call Benji right before he loses consciousness. So he wakes up in the hospital, and Benji's like, what the fuck happened? What's going on? And then there's like a really sweet moment between Jake and Benji where Jake is like, hey, I'm gay. And Benji's like, yeah. And Jake's like, it's not that obvious. And Benji's like, no, you're pretty gay. So it was like a nice coming out moment and like a sweet moment between Jake and Benji, because we don't get a lot of those. But it was altogether a happy ending. Fiona and Alistair are hanging out. He and Alistair started officially dating, and it was a really cute ending to a very hard and rough book. There are some side characters that we didn't get a ton of, and the book The book is very short, so there's a lot packed into it. It's 244 pages, but there's a lot going on. Like I said, there's a bunch of side plots with other characters. There is a sort of mentor that Jake has. She is a medium also, and so he goes to her at one point and is like, I'm being followed by this ghost, I don't really know what's going on, and she kind of helps him. And then there is a moment where Jake speaks to his grandfather, and his grandfather says you can use the power of your ancestors to help you through this situation with Sawyer, as well as assuring him that it's okay that he is gay. So a lot packed into a very tiny book. I did enjoy it, however, it is a lot. I think a lot of people will struggle with reading Sawyer's point of view because it is hard, especially because he's going through some things. He's being bullied, he's having struggles with his mental health, he's going through all of these things, but at the same time, the way he responds to some of those things is very concerning. He kind of takes joy sometimes in hurting other people, and that's going to be really hard. A few things that I disliked about this is that some of the side plot points felt unresolved. For example, Jake eventually confronts Chad and he ends up stabbing him in the hand with a pencil. So Jake gets into the principal's office and he's explaining what happened and how Chad has been harassing him for months. And when he says that, the principal says, well, I haven't heard of that, as if that makes it untrue. And there was really no conclusion with that. Like, Jake gets suspended, but then we don't hear anything about Chad, and basically there are no repercussions for Chad. Chad eventually, I guess, leaves him alone, but that's like it. There's also the fact that we see Sawyer using Jake's body to kill his uncle, and he sets the house on fire, but then there's nothing mentioned about that. Like, the fire's not on the news, the body isn't found, there's like no conclusion there. There was also a student that Sawyer killed, her name was River. So Jake can astral project, I think it's called, when his spirit sort of leaves his body and he can like walk around in Dead World. He's doing that at the school to see, like, you know, what happened that day. And there's a student, her name is River, and Sawyer killed her, but she was like stuck in the room where she was hiding for whatever reason, and Jake eventually helps her pass on. But we like get her story, and then Jake helps her get a message to her mom, but then she sort of helps Jake banish Sawyer, but I don't really understand the purpose of her. Felt like she was just kind of thrown in there and then like never seen again. Miss Josette, the other medium that Jake goes to, she's only in like one scene, never seen again. So those things just felt unresolved to me. On the other hand, there were a lot of things that I really liked. Like I said, I really enjoyed the friendship between Jake, Fiona, and Alistair. There was good character development for Benji. Like I said in the beginning, I didn't really like him. He got on my nerves, and then at the end, he starts being a better person, he starts being a better boyfriend, a better brother, and I appreciated that. And I did like that Jake got to have a conversation with his grandfather. I do wish that we kind of gotten a little more of that, and if we weren't going to get more, then maybe it shouldn't have been included. It was kind of just left unsatisfying because I would have really liked to get more of that. Like I said, I did enjoy this book. I rated it 4 stars. I would recommend it if you can get through all of the content warnings, but otherwise, I would not recommend that you pick it up. It is very heavy. I read this at the same time as Grown, which was a terrible idea because both of them just made me either really sad or really mad. So definitely don't read it at the same time as another really heavy book. But let me know if you have read The Taking of Jake Livingston or if it's on your TBR. Otherwise, that's all I have for you today, and I'll see you in the next video.